That day, she couldn't pretend to be strong anymore. There was no mask, no polite smile, no automatic "I'm fine," just to keep everyone from worrying. For the first time, after years of swallowing her pain in silence, she allowed herself to fall apart. She sat on the cold bedroom floor, wrapped her arms around her legs, and with a trembling voice finally let out the question she had been hiding like a forbidden secret. "Why me?" The words came out small, but they carried everything she never dared to say. They held the weight of all the times she tried and failed, of all the dreams that always felt far away, of the doors that closed without explanation. They carried the exhaustion of fighting her own mind, of believing and being disappointed, of getting up only to fall again. And it was exactly in that moment, when she felt the most lost, the most broken, the most invisible, that something unexpected happened. The silence around her shifted. It wasn't the usual empty silence she knew so well. This one was different, deeper, heavier, almost sacred. A silence that felt like it was listening. And then, as if the universe itself had leaned toward her, the answer came. Not in audible words, but in a sensation so real it sent chills across her skin. "Watch." She didn't understand it. But she felt it. She felt that something was about to change. She felt that the question born from her pain would become the beginning of a transformation she never imagined she would live. And for the first time in a long while, she breathed as if she could sense life turning a new page. She stayed there on the floor, feeling the echo of her own question vibrating inside her chest. "Why me?" The phrase felt bigger than her, bigger than that silent room, bigger than everything she had lived so far. Deep down, that question held years of silent battles. The kind no one sees, but that destroy you from the inside. She couldn't explain why the pain overflowed on that particular day. Maybe it was the weight of too many failed attempts. Maybe it was the feeling of being invisible again. Or maybe, it was simply the limit. The limit of trying to be strong when there was no strength left. The heaviness in her chest felt almost physical. As the morning sun slipped through the tiny crack in the window and softened the room, she felt completely dimmed inside. How can someone feel so empty and so full of pain at the same time? She didn't know. She only knew that the morning tasted like surrender, and at the same time, like a silent plea for something, anything, to finally change. In the days before, she had collected small failures that looked insignificant on their own but together became almost unbearable. The message that never arrived. The unexpected no. The door that closed without warning. The silence from people she wished would support her. And that old, familiar feeling of doing everything wrong. It's incredible how tiny wounds, when they pile up, can scream so loudly inside of us. She tried to stand, but it was as if her legs no longer belonged to her. So she stayed there, breathing deeply, trying to gather herself while her heart begged for a break. Maybe the most painful part wasn't what was happening outside, but what was happening inside her. That thought that kept returning like a cruel whisper, "You're not enough." It was that thought, invisible to everyone else, that hurt her in ways no one could see. She closed her eyes for a moment, wishing with all her strength she could vanish from her own life for just a few minutes, just long enough to rest from the endless battle constantly running in her mind. It was a strange feeling, living on autopilot. Waking up, trying, failing, forcing a smile, lying down, repeating everything again. As if she were trapped in a loop she didn't know how to escape. And it consumed her in a quiet, devastating way. With a shaky breath, she wondered how many other people in the world had ever felt like that, so small before life, so tired of being strong, so exhausted from holding everything together with their own hands. Because even though she sat there alone that morning, she sensed this pain wasn't just hers. It was a human pain, a universal ache, that only gains a name when someone finds the courage to admit, "I can't do this anymore." Yet still, something inside her wouldn't settle. Maybe it was hope, maybe stubbornness. Maybe the last spark of an ancient faith, the kind that hides but refuses to die, even when everything else collapses. It was that quiet spark that made her heart beat a little harder. She didn't know it yet, but this was the first sign that her story was far from ending there. At some point, still on the floor, she lifted her head as if trying to understand the invisible. The silence was still there, but something in the air had shifted. It felt as if life itself were waiting for her next question. As if her vulnerability had opened a door she had never been able to access before. And for the first time, instead of hiding her pain, she allowed it to be seen, even if only by herself. What she couldn't know was that, in that exact moment, the universe was already moving pieces she couldn't see. That the answer to her question, "Why me?" would arrive in ways she could never imagine. But before anything could change, she needed to feel exactly what she was feeling. Because from that deepest place, the strength that would change everything was about to rise. And then, with tear-stained cheeks and a trembling chest, she took a deep breath. The first real one in a long time. As if sensing that something greater was approaching. Without knowing it, she was standing at the doorway of a transformation that would reshape her entire life. In the days leading up to that morning, she felt as if everything were collapsing around her. Nothing made sense anymore. The things that once required effort now demanded twice as much. Simple tasks felt heavy. Conversations felt distant. It was as if she were walking through a world where everyone else kept moving forward, while she remained stuck, sinking in her own emotions. The feeling of failure didn't come from one specific thing, but from the accumulation of everything that never seemed to work. And that accumulation weighed on her like a mountain she could no longer carry. She kept trying, again and again, always believing that maybe this time something would finally work, only to watch another attempt slip right through her fingers. It felt as if life were watching her with a hint of irony, testing her limits day after day. And even when she tried not to blame herself, that familiar inner voice, the same one that had followed her since childhood, whispered that maybe the problem was her. That thought tore her apart from the inside, slowly eating away at her confidence and leaving invisible marks no one would ever notice. Every time she fell, she promised herself it would be the last. That she wouldn't cry again. That she wouldn't return to that dark corner inside her mind. But the truth is, she had no idea how to stop it. Fear, frustration, and exhaustion wrapped around her like deep roots, holding her still. How could she explain that to someone from the outside? How do you justify a heart that's tired? How do you translate the emotional exhaustion of someone who has spent a lifetime trying to be strong? And then there was the loneliness, not the physical kind, but the kind that comes from feeling misunderstood, from feeling unseen, from rebuilding yourself every single day just to keep going. It was a quiet, suffocating loneliness that made her wonder if anyone would ever truly see her for who she really was on the inside, her fears, her doubts, and the enormous heart just trying to survive. In the middle of all that noise, she closed her eyes and wished, with everything in her, for someone to guide her. Someone who would sit beside her, take her hand, and whisper, "I understand. You're not alone." But no one came. And as painful as it was, she knew she had to keep going anyway. She needed to find strength in places where strength didn't seem to exist. She was searching desperately for even a thin thread of light that could somehow soften the chaos inside her. Then, in a small, almost invisible moment, she realized she couldn't keep carrying that pain alone. And something shifted. Subtly, quietly, but it shifted. A tiny desire to ask the universe for help rose inside her. Not out of despair, but out of honesty. A sincere plea for something, anything, to finally change. And in that moment, a question surfaced, not as a burden, but as an invitation. "And you? Have you ever felt this way too?" If this chapter of her story touched you, write the word strength in the comments. This word isn't just a response, it's a reminder of the power that already lives inside you. And while you're here, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might need this message, someone carrying the weight of the world without realizing there's still hope. She remained still for a few seconds, letting the intensity of her own plea settle inside her chest. It felt strange to ask the unknown for help, but for the first time, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like courage, the courage to admit she wasn't okay, the courage to admit she needed answers. And somewhere deep within her, that honesty began to open a small doorway. With her heart still heavy, yet somehow lighter than it had been that morning, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt and stared into the distance, as if trying to understand her own path. She knew she would still face difficult days. She knew nothing would change overnight. But that small moment of surrender, that quiet question to the universe, had already begun a silent process of transformation. She had no idea, but that moment would become the thread that would pull an entirely new reality into her life. And while she took a deep breath, trying to regain control, the universe was already preparing to send her the most unexpected answer she would ever receive. In the days that followed, she began to notice something strange, almost unsettling. It felt as if even her own mirror struggled to recognize her. It wasn't just the tired eyes or the half-forced smile of someone trying to look fine. It was deeper than that. When she looked at herself, she had the impression she was staring at a faded version of who she used to be, someone she didn't remember becoming, someone who no longer matched the dreams she once carried in her chest. It was as if she had lost herself along the way, without noticing when it happened. Have you ever looked at yourself and felt like you couldn't find who you were anymore? She woke up every morning hoping, today will be different, but it never took long for that old familiar weight to settle inside her again. A weight that can't be explained with words. A weight born from accumulated attempts, emotional exhaustion, and the silent feeling of always being behind in your own life. She did everything she could, but nothing seemed enough to change her path. And that hurt in a way no one around her ever seemed to notice. Her thoughts began to grow heavier, darker. She found herself wondering if there was truly anything special about her, or if she had simply built an illusion about who she was all these years. What if I was never as good as I believed, she whispered to herself while washing dishes, walking down the street, or trying to work. It felt like doubt had settled permanently inside her mind, trying to steal whatever hope was still left. But the part that hurt the most wasn't the doubt, it was the comparison. Watching other people move forward, achieve things, be seen, be celebrated, be recognized, while she remained in the same place. She didn't feel envy, she felt inadequacy. She felt like something inside her was broken, something that kept her from moving forward even when she tried her hardest. And that made her chest tighten in a way that almost felt physical. And you? Have you ever felt like everyone else is moving ahead except you? The small defeats began to leave deep marks. The message left unseen. The opportunity that slipped away. The careless comment that cut without intention. The silence that came exactly when she needed to be heard. Each of these moments turned into memories that echoed inside her like warnings, you don't matter that much. And even though she hid it well, it destroyed her from within. She smiled, she talked, she functioned, but she wasn't living. Not really. There was one night, especially heavy, when she felt trapped in a dark room inside herself. She tried to turn on the light, but nothing happened. She tried to call out, but no one came. She tried to escape, but there was nowhere to go. It was just her and her thoughts. Fear, insecurity, pain, everything mixed, everything tangled. And in the middle of that internal fog, she whispered to herself, I just wanted to be seen. Have you ever felt that deep, aching need to be truly noticed? Even as she tried to stay strong, she knew she was reaching her limit. The dreams that once lit her path now felt distant, almost unreal. She tried to bring back the version of herself who believed in the impossible, who smiled without fear, who dreamed big, but it was like trying to hold water with her hands. The harder she tried, the faster everything slipped away. And yet, as strange as it seemed, there was something inside her pain that wasn't complete darkness. It was as if, somehow, the suffering itself was shaping something within her, a perception, a quiet shift, something she couldn't understand yet, but that one day she would realize had been essential for everything she was meant to live. For now, all she could feel was that painful mix of someone who tries but sees no results, someone who longs but never reaches, someone who dreams but no longer knows how to believe. And as the days passed, she had no idea that this emptiness would become the soil where something entirely new would begin to grow. Little by little, she started to realize that the greatest battle she faced wasn't with the world around her, but with what was happening inside. Her mind had become a silent battlefield, where each thought seemed to question her very existence. It didn't matter how hard she tried to stay positive, a single detail was enough to make everything collapse again. It felt like walking on unstable ground that could give way at any moment, and that constant emotional instability kept her on alert all the time. There were days when she woke up with a slight hint of hope, believing things could be different. But all it took was one indifferent look, one unexpected demand, one painful memory, and her heart would drop again. Her emotions moved like uncontrollable waves. One moment she could breathe, the next her chest felt tight, as if something inside her was being crushed. And in those moments, the question always came, will this ever go away? Have you ever asked yourself that too, scared of the answer? What hurt the most was the feeling of failing herself, of disappointing her own expectations. She remembered the plans she made at the beginning of the year, the dreams she wrote down with so much enthusiasm, the promises to take better care of herself, to start over, to not let anything break her, and now, sitting there, she felt like she had failed at everything. This isn't just frustration, it's a kind of sadness that weighs on your soul, that makes you question who you are. And she felt that every single day. Even when she tried to stay calm, there were moments when fear took over. A quiet, deep fear with no shape and no name, but powerful enough to paralyze. Fear of not making it, fear of disappointing the people she loved, fear of never being enough, fear of never finding her place. That fear seeped into her thoughts like a persistent shadow, making her doubt every step she took. Have you ever felt that kind of fear, the one that feels impossible to escape? She began to withdraw from people without wanting to. Not because she didn't care about them, but because she believed no one would understand the chaos she carried. So she started to choose silence. To avoid messages. To decline invitations. To cancel plans. Her world slowly shrank, reduced to the walls of her room and the tangled thoughts that refused to leave her alone. And that created even more loneliness, more distance, more pain. Sometimes she tried to talk to someone, but always gave up before saying anything. She was afraid of being seen as dramatic, weak, or too much. So she held everything in. She held it until it overflowed. Held it until there was no space left. She held so much that she began to feel heavy on the inside, as if carrying invisible stones that kept her from moving forward. And in that silent buildup, her self-esteem started to crumble like sand slipping through her fingers. One afternoon, while she was trying to work, she felt her chest tighten in a strange way. It wasn't the usual anxiety, it was a mix of emotional exhaustion and silent desperation, the kind of feeling that arrives uninvited and takes over everything. She had to stop. Close her eyes. Breathe. But it didn't help. Her heart kept racing, and her mind kept repeating those painful phrases over and over again. You can't do it, nothing ever works for you, why do you keep trying? And she wondered, almost in a whisper, if anyone in the world had ever felt something quite like that. The days had grown too long. The nights, even worse. And she began to believe that maybe she was meant to live like this, as if life were nothing more than a sequence of failed attempts and disappointments. But deep inside, a small part of her was still pleading for change. Still begging for a chance to breathe without fear, to smile without pretending, to live without carrying the weight of everything. She just didn't know that this chance was already being prepared for her. And even though she didn't realize it, she was getting close to the moment when everything would begin to shift, even if, in that exact moment, her soul had never felt more wounded. Something was different during that time, a strange, almost deafening silence that followed her even when the world around her was loud. It was as if there was an emptiness inside her that screamed, but no one could hear it. She felt like something inside her was slipping away, as if each day carried off a part of her she no longer knew how to recover. It was a hard feeling to describe, yet painfully familiar, being alive on the outside, but dimmed on the inside. She tried to follow her daily routine, but everything felt unbearably heavy. Even the simplest tasks, making the bed, replying to a message, brewing a cup of coffee, demanded an energy she didn't have anymore. Every action required emotional effort. Every choice felt like an internal battle. And the worst part was that no one noticed. To the world, she still functioned. She was still polite, kind, present. But inside, she was exhausted from trying to look strong all the time. Have you ever lived that feeling of fighting yourself while the world keeps moving as if nothing is happening? There were moments when she felt she was carrying an old sadness, ancient, rooted, almost inherited. A pain that didn't begin that month or that year, but had been growing for far longer. Maybe since childhood. Maybe since the first time she heard she wasn't enough. Maybe since the first dream someone tried to diminish. And now that old pain had returned with force, as if demanding to finally be seen and acknowledged. The memories also came back with more intensity. She remembered every attempt that didn't work out. Every door that closed in her face. Every broken promise. Every project abandoned not because she lacked the will, but because she lacked support. And as those memories stacked on top of each other, her heart seemed to shrink under the pressure of so many frustrations. It felt as if everything she had ever tried was piling up in front of her like unanswered questions. And she wondered, why does it seem so easy for everyone else and so hard for me? Have you ever felt that way? Slowly, she began to believe she simply wasn't born to shine. Not because she didn't want to, but because life seemed to extinguish her light every time she tried to ignite it. That feeling of being interrupted by life, of being cut in half inside your own dreams, was devastating. Every time she took one step forward, something pulled her 2 steps back. And the sense of injustice, that quiet, unspoken ache almost no one admits to feeling, took over her heart more often than she liked to confess. There was one night in particular when she felt so small, so broken, so disconnected from her own worth that she sat on the edge of her bed for minutes that felt like hours. The tears fell silently, but her heart was screaming. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. A quiet plea for life to show her some meaning, some direction, some answer. Have you ever had a night like that, when the pain speaks louder than every thought? And beneath all of this, there was a fear she tried to hide even from herself, the fear of never changing, of continuing to live the same reality filled with frustrations, repetitions, and broken expectations. The fear of never finding her purpose. That fear paralyzed her, as if holding her arms and legs in place, whispering in her ear, "There's no point in trying." And it hurt her in a way no words could ever describe. But even there, in the darkest place, something inside her was still alive. A spark. A tiny light, almost invisible, but insistent. She didn't know where it came from, but she felt it wasn't the end. Even tired, even broken, even unbelieving, something inside her kept breathing. Something whispered, very softly, that maybe, just maybe, everything she was feeling had a purpose far greater than she could imagine. And that small spark would be the very thing that changed everything, though she had no idea. She was about to step into the most important moment of her life. She began to notice that the exhaustion was no longer just in her body, it was in her soul. It was a deep, slow, silent weariness that drained the color from everything around her. Life seemed to move in muted tones, as if someone had lowered the saturation of the world. She woke up without wanting to start the day. She walked without feeling steady in her steps. She looked ahead without seeing any future at all. It was like living in a dark hallway where every door was locked. What once stirred excitement now felt distant. The dreams she had nurtured so tenderly felt unreal, like stories that belonged to someone else, to a version of her that no longer existed. She blamed herself for that. She questioned how she had allowed her own hope to wear down so much. But the truth was simple: after so many falls, so many attempts that led nowhere, so many disappointments piled on top of each other, her heart was simply too tired to believe. The days began to look the same. She did what she had to do, but felt no connection to anything. It was as if she were watching her own life from the outside, a silent spectator who didn't know how to step back into herself. What hurt the most wasn't the failure, but the lack of meaning. The feeling of living without direction, without light, without strength. The feeling of carrying a vast emptiness that seemed to have no end. She tried to find comfort in small things, but even those felt far away. Coffee no longer had flavor. Music didn't touch her the way it once did. Writing, the one thing that had always eased her soul, now felt like another difficult task. Nothing seemed able to reach her. It was as if there were an invisible wall between her and the world, keeping everything from touching her deeply. And that internal isolation, though silent, was devastating. There was a morning when she got out of bed and felt like her body was moving only out of obligation. Every motion felt calculated, as if she were programmed to exist, not to live. The mirror reflected not just physical exhaustion, but an empty, distant gaze she barely recognized. It was as if a flame inside her was about to go out, and she had no idea how to reignite it. Deep down, what scared her most wasn't the exhaustion, but the lack of reaction. She no longer had the strength to cry, to complain, to ask for help. It was as if she had crossed a threshold and entered a gray zone where everything felt indifferent. This apathy hurt more than sadness ever could. It hurt because it showed she was drifting away from her own essence, losing the connection to the part of her that once believed life had something meant for her. She vaguely remembered what it felt like to be excited about something. To dream intensely. To believe in the impossible. It was heartbreaking to realize that those memories now felt as distant as childhood. She tried to reach for them, but every attempt came with a bitter taste of failure, as if all of it belonged to a life she let slip through her fingers without noticing. For days, she lived with the idea that maybe nothing would ever change. There was no expectation, no hope, no strength left to start over. Just an automatic routine and a soul far too tired to react. But, unseen by her, that point of exhaustion was quietly preparing the ground for something greater. She needed to touch the bottom so a new rise could begin. She needed to walk through that darkness so that when the light finally arrived, it would transform everything. And there, in the deep silence of her own emptiness, something was shifting, even if she couldn't feel it. A quiet, discreet, almost invisible change that would soon take shape. The problems began showing up outside of her too, mirroring the storm she already lived inside. Work, which had once only been tiring, now felt like a maze with no exit. She gave everything she had, arrived early, left late, pushed herself to deliver more than anyone asked, yet it was as if she didn't exist there. Her ideas were ignored, her suggestions dismissed, and when something finally worked, someone else almost always received the credit. It felt like the world had collectively decided she would remain invisible forever. Her paycheck barely covered her basic expenses. Every bill became a new kind of pain, an emotional burden on top of the financial one. The due dates piled up like shadows, reminding her daily that her life was slipping out of control. She did math in her head while walking through the house, trying to figure out where she could squeeze out just a little more so she wouldn't fall behind again. It was humiliating to admit that even working so hard, she still couldn't breathe financially. And then there was the project, the old dream she had tried to bring to life for years, but always hit a wall: lack of time, lack of money, or lack of faith. Every time she tried to invest in it, something went wrong. An unexpected expense, an emergency, a discouraging comment from someone close. It felt like life itself kept sabotaging her steps. And that made her feel like maybe she wasn't worthy of dreaming at all. The relationships around her also began to wear down. People she loved slowly drifted away, not out of cruelty, but through a silent kind of disinterest. Messages that used to flow back and forth now went unanswered. Invitations that once felt natural were replaced with vague excuses. She could feel herself losing space in people's lives, and she didn't know how to stop it. Affection slipped through her fingers, no matter how tightly she tried to hold on. And then came the comparisons. People close to her celebrating the very achievements she dreamed of for herself. Friends getting promoted. Colleagues traveling, buying cars, opening businesses, living dreams she still kept on paper. And there she was, stuck. Not because she didn't try, she did, endlessly, but because nothing seemed to flow her way. Every success from someone else hurt, not out of envy, but because it reminded her of how far behind she felt in her own life. It was like watching the whole world move forward while she remained trapped in a place where the ground wouldn't let her walk. One of the deepest pains came when she lost an opportunity she had waited months for. It was supposed to be a turning point, something that would finally open the door to a new chapter, but the call she hoped for never came. On the day of the results, all she received was a short, cold, impersonal email. A simple, "Unfortunately, you were not selected," that shattered weeks of silent expectations. She felt the ground disappear beneath her. She felt like she had failed herself all over again. There was also the emotional tension inside her own home. Small conflicts suddenly became big. Words spoken without intention began to wound her deeply. She tried to stay calm, tried not to react, but it felt like life itself was conspiring to test her. The feeling of carrying everything alone grew heavier. And each new demand, each new criticism, each new disagreement created internal cracks she no longer knew how to mend. Deep down, she wanted nothing more than a moment of peace. A moment to breathe without fearing what might happen next. But life always seemed ready to push her just a little further. It became a sequence that never stopped: work that suffocates, bills that tighten, relationships that drain, dreams that don't move, opportunities that slip away. And with each passing day, she felt smaller and smaller in front of her own destiny. The outside world now reflected exactly what she carried inside: chaos, weight, darkness, frustration. And she began to believe she might be living her limit, the point where life demands an answer, even when you have no strength left to give one. What she didn't know was that this accumulation of pain was about to push her into something completely different from anything she had ever known. The problems started multiplying faster than she could keep up with. It felt as if the universe had pressed a button that accelerated everything that was already out of place in her life. Every day brought something new to handle, something new to fix, something new to survive. The feeling of overload became constant. She woke up tired, as if she had spent the entire night wrestling with an invisible weight. One of the main sources of tension was her home. Small things began to break, and she couldn't afford to fix them. The faucet that wouldn't stop dripping. The outlet that suddenly stopped working. The door that swelled and no longer closed properly. They were small details, meaningless on their own, but together they became a daily reminder that nothing was going right. Every time something broke, she felt as if another piece of her own control was breaking too. Work had also become a place of growing tension. A simple mistake turned into a reason for disproportionate criticism. A task she completed with so much effort was received with coldness. She gave everything she could, but the environment felt more hostile each day. There were judging eyes, diminishing words, and a silence heavier than shouting. It was as if she had to prove her worth every single moment, and still be treated as if she had none. On top of that, something inside her began to falter in a way she didn't want to admit. Her mind was too tired to think clearly. Her memory slipped. Decisions felt harder. Concentration scattered like sand through her fingers. And this mental exhaustion made her doubt herself even more. She felt like she was losing control of her own mind, like she was falling behind inside her own head. And then came the unexpected financial blows. The refrigerator broke at the worst possible time. The electricity bill arrived higher than usual. The medication she needed became more expensive. And just when she thought nothing else could tighten further, an automatic payment she had forgotten about drained what little she had left in her account. It was the kind of small blow that may not seem devastating to someone on the outside, but to someone already at their limit, it steals the breath. Even her health began to collapse under the weight of everything. Her body hurt more than before, as if carrying the emotional burdens she tried so hard to hide. The headaches became more frequent. The sleepless nights turned into routine. Physical exhaustion blended with emotional exhaustion until it became one single, indistinguishable heaviness. She felt small inside her own body, unable to understand what was happening, but fully aware that she was not okay. Her personal relationships grew more fragile too. People who once felt close began treating her with impatience. They judged her silence, her absence, her lack of energy, without having any idea of the chaos she carried. And at the same time, she withdrew automatically. Not out of pride, but out of pure exhaustion. She no longer had the energy to explain anything, justify anything, defend anything. She just wanted a little peace, but even that felt impossible to find. Then came the emotional blow she never expected. Someone she considered essential simply didn't have time for her. There was no fight, no conflict, no declared ending. Just absence. A cold, indifferent absence that made her realize she had been holding together bonds that had fallen apart long ago. That was perhaps the wound that cut the deepest, because it confirmed the fear she carried quietly inside. She was wearing herself out for people who were not willing to stay. The sum of all this created a daily sense of suffocation. There was no space to breathe, no pause to process, no rest to gather strength again. Life was charging, pushing, collapsing, all at once. And there she was, trying to stay standing while everything around her insisted on falling apart. In the middle of all this chaos, she sincerely believed she wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. But it was exactly at this point, when everything seemed to be getting worse, that something invisible was already being prepared to completely change her story. There came a moment when she realized she wasn't just tired, she was exhausted all the way down to the roots of her soul. It wasn't a kind of tiredness that rest could fix. It wasn't something a weekend off, a good night's sleep, or an encouraging conversation could heal. It was a deep exhaustion, the kind that makes the body beg for mercy and the mind give up before even trying. She felt as if she had spent years carrying something impossibly heavy, and suddenly, the weight had become even greater. On that specific day, everything fell apart. She woke up late, the alarm never went off, the coffee burned on the stove, and the bus ran even later than usual. But even though it all looked like a simple string of inconveniences, she felt as if it were a sign that something inside her was about to break. Her heart raced for no reason, her hands trembled, her breath faltered. It was as if her own body were trying to warn her that it couldn't keep going like that anymore. When she arrived at work, things only got worse. A simple task, one she had always done without difficulty, suddenly felt almost impossible. Her mind wouldn't process, her eyes burned, her body refused to cooperate. Her boss looked at her with impatience, and her coworkers exchanged silent glances of judgment. She knew exactly what they were thinking, that she couldn't handle it, that she was distracted, that she was unreliable. And the thought cut her so deeply she could barely hide the impact. During lunch, she sat alone in a corner, trying to breathe deeply so she wouldn't fall apart. It was as if she were surrounded by people but living inside a bubble no one could see. The food on her plate felt meaningless. The noise around her sounded distant. All she could hear was her own mind repeating, over and over again, that maybe this was really her life, always fighting, always losing, always trying to survive. The idea of living in that cycle forever hurt more than any external criticism ever could. When she got home, the afternoon ended worse than it began. A payment she was expecting didn't arrive. An unexpected bill showed up. Something important slipped from her hand and broke while she was trying to tidy up the house. Nothing catastrophic to the outside world, but for someone already at the edge, it was devastating. Small tragedies turn into major collapses when the heart can no longer hold on. By the end of the day, she realized she was experiencing something she had never felt so intensely before, the feeling of giving up on herself. Not because she wanted to, but because she no longer knew how to continue. The strength that had always held her up felt completely drained. There were no tears left to ease what she felt. There were no words that could describe the silent pain building inside her, as if life had lost all of its color. She tried to talk to someone, but the words wouldn't come. It was as though her voice had been stolen by her own suffering. She didn't want to worry anyone, but she couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. The weight in her chest felt like an anchor slowly pulling her down. And in that exact moment, she realized it wasn't just sadness, it was a complete emotional collapse, a level of exhaustion that bordered on unbearable. When night finally fell, heavy and silent, she allowed everything to crumble. She didn't fight the tears. She didn't try to think positively. She didn't search for reasons. She simply felt. She felt everything with full intensity, as if her soul were crying out for help. She sat in the corner of her bed, arms wrapped around her knees, struggling to breathe while trying to find something, anything, to hold onto so she wouldn't fall completely inside herself. For a moment, she truly believed that this was the end. The end of hope. The end of strength. The end of her ability to keep moving forward. But without realizing it, that emotional rock bottom, which felt like her complete downfall, was actually clearing the path for a silent shift, a shift she would only recognize much later. That night, after everything inside her collapsed at once, she sat for a long time in silence, staring at the floor as if searching for answers in meaningless details. The house was completely still, yet inside her there was a storm so loud that she couldn't untangle a single thought. It felt as if her heart were begging for help, but she had no idea where to turn. Her exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, spiritual. The kind of heaviness that doesn't heal with rest, because it's born from years of accumulated weight. She felt a pain in her chest that wasn't exactly physical, but just as real as any wound. A constant tightness, as if she were carrying a giant stone she couldn't lift. Sadness seeped into everything. It wasn't temporary anymore, it had become a steady presence, a shadow that followed her everywhere. She wondered, without saying a word, when she had lost herself like this. At what moment she stopped being who she once was and became this faded version she barely recognized. Her thoughts grew heavier, darker. A mind worn down by exhaustion turned small worries into enormous fears. Logic slipped away, replaced by destructive conclusions she would never believe in a moment of clarity. It was as if she were looking at her life from the worst angle possible, and that distorted perspective made her believe things that weren't true. But in that state, everything felt real. Everything felt final. Her heart raced, as if trying to warn her that something needed to change, that she couldn't keep going like this. But at the same time, a part of her felt like it had given up. It was a painful contradiction, wanting to breathe, but feeling like the air wouldn't reach her, wanting to move, but not knowing how. She felt trapped inside herself, trapped in the pain, trapped in the fear, trapped in a cycle that seemed to have no end. The night went on, and she remained completely still, as if her whole body had been switched off. It was a strange place between exhaustion and paralysis, aware of the pain but unable to respond to it. Every thought hurt. Every memory stung. Every glimpse of the future felt impossible. She wasn't crying anymore, the tears had dried, as if her body had given up trying to express what she felt. And that was even more frightening than the crying. There was a moment when she lay down and stared at the ceiling, completely still, completely surrendered to the emptiness. She wasn't thinking of anything specific, but she felt everything all at once. The feeling of being too big to carry alone. The feeling of being too small to face it all. A cruel mix that left her without direction. The world felt distant, out of reach, and she felt disconnected from everything. And then, almost imperceptibly, a small doubt crept into the chaos. Not a destructive doubt, but a soft one, delicate, barely formed. What if it wasn't meant to be this way? The thought didn't come as hope, but as a question. A crack in the suffering. A tiny pause in the pain. Something shifted there, so subtly she didn't notice it. But the universe did. That small doubt was enough to make her heart react. Not with strength, but with a faint tremor, like a weak flame trying to rise again after almost going out. Life works like that. Sometimes all it takes for things to begin shifting is one simple thought, almost accidental, that creates a tiny opening inside the darkness. She didn't know it, but in that moment, something inside her had finally loosened, not her strength, but her resistance. The resistance to believing that nothing could ever change. And when that barrier cracked, even just a little, life, silent and patient, began to move toward her, ready to answer the question she had asked days before. But she wasn't ready to notice that yet. She still needed to walk through a few more shadows before the light could begin to appear. The days that followed felt strangely mechanical. She got up, walked through the house, went through her routines, but it was as if she were watching herself from a distance. Nothing truly reached her. It was an empty, quiet, painfully automatic existence. She noticed that she was living, but she didn't feel alive. Her thoughts remained heavy, her energy stayed low, and her body dragged itself forward even when she tried to push. Her soul was exhausted, and that exhaustion began to show in ways she didn't expect. Her body started sending clearer signals that something was wrong. The tiredness wasn't just emotional anymore, it had become physical. She felt pain in her back, in her shoulders, in her legs, as if she were carrying a weight she couldn't put down. Some days her head throbbed non-stop, other days her chest hurt for no reason at all. She knew her body was reacting to what her mind refused to confront, the buildup of pain, frustration, fear, and silence. Negative thoughts also began interfering with the simplest things. She mixed up dates, forgot commitments, got lost in tasks she once handled effortlessly. A casual conversation required mental effort. A simple decision felt like a challenge. It was as if her mind were overloaded, unable to process the life happening around her. And that terrified her, because she had always been strong, always been capable, always managed everything. But now, even the things she used to do naturally felt like they demanded 3 times the effort. Her home, which once felt like a refuge, began to carry a heavy atmosphere. The mess started piling up, not because she wanted it there, but because she had no energy to fix it. Half-washed dishes, clothes scattered around, objects out of place. It was as if her internal chaos had started manifesting in everything around her. And every detail that was out of order reinforced the feeling that her life had become completely unbalanced. Her relationships also began reflecting her pain. Unanswered messages accumulated. Friends started noticing her silence. People close to her assumed she was distant by choice, when in reality she simply didn't have the strength to be who she used to be. She felt guilty about that, yet completely unable to act differently. The emotional pain was so overwhelming that pretending to be fine had become impossible. There was one moment she would never forget. she was at the grocery store, needing only a few basic items, and still felt completely unable to continue. The lines seemed too long, the noise too loud, the people too close. The floor slipped from under her for a second, and she had to leave the cart behind and walk out. It wasn't embarrassment. It was exhaustion. Overload. Her body saying, "I can't do this anymore." When she got home, she closed the door and leaned her back against it as if she were trying to keep the whole world out. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. It felt strange to be this fragile after so many years of being strong. Strange to realize she could no longer hide from herself what she was feeling. It was a quiet pain no one saw, but it was draining every bit of energy she had left. She felt herself on the edge of a real collapse, but still didn't know how to ask for help. And in the silence of the night, as she tried to fall asleep, she realized something important: the pain was no longer just sadness. It was a signal. A warning. A limit. A limit that, if crossed, could take her to even darker places. And that realization, painful as it was, became the first spark of awareness she had felt in a very long time. She was reaching the point where life demands a choice: keep losing herself, or start looking for herself again. But before making any choice, she needed to face her own truth: she was not okay. And admitting that would be the first step toward everything that was coming next. She began to notice that she was living in survival mode. It was no longer about waking up and going through a normal routine. Now, each morning was a silent battle, an internal negotiation just to get out of bed. The alarm would ring, but her body stayed still, as if pinned down by a weight she couldn't lift. Her mind searched for excuses to stay there, hidden under the covers, far from a world that demanded more from her than she could give. But in the end, she forced herself to get up, not out of strength, but out of necessity. Slowly, what once felt like exhaustion turned into a kind of emotional numbness. She no longer reacted the way she used to. Things that once irritated her now just passed by. Moments that once brought joy barely touched her anymore. She felt as if she were living behind a sheet of glass, unable to truly interact with the world around her. It was a strange feeling, physically present, but absent inside. It was as if the part of her that felt had been involuntarily shut off. That emotional shutdown began affecting her daily choices. She stopped getting ready like before. Stopped caring about details that had always mattered to her. Stopped worrying about what others thought, not out of growth, but because she was worn out. When someone criticized her, she simply lowered her head and accepted it. When something unfair happened, she took a deep breath and let it pass. She no longer had energy for reactions. Life was happening around her, and she didn't have the strength to participate. Inside her home, the emptiness became even more obvious. She spent long minutes sitting in the living room doing nothing, thinking nothing, just existing in that silent space. Sometimes she stared out the window without truly seeing anything outside. Other times she lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how her life had reached that point, a point where she no longer recognized herself, and couldn't imagine how to find her way back. And even then, there was a deep ache that kept pulsing inside her, a pain born from knowing that parts of her still wanted to live, to begin again, to want something different. But those parts were suffocated, crushed under the weight of everything she had endured. It was like having a small flame trapped inside a glass jar, trying to breathe but without enough air to grow. In the quietest moments of the night, she would place her hand over her chest and feel her heart beating slowly, heavily, almost reluctantly. It felt as if even it was tired. And in those moments, a sense of urgency would rise within her, not a desire to fix everything, but a deep awareness that continuing like this simply wasn't sustainable. It was a subtle inner warning, almost invisible, whispering that something needed to change, even if she didn't know what. Loneliness also began to take on new shapes. It wasn't just the absence of people, it was the absence of herself. She missed the version of her who laughed loudly, who dreamed fiercely, who made plans without fear, who believed in the future with bright eyes. It was a longing for herself, a nostalgia for who she once was. And that longing hurt, because it reminded her that she had gotten lost somewhere along the way, and still didn't know how to find her way back. Every night, she went to bed hoping sleep would bring some kind of relief. But most nights, sleep came quickly and shallow, without real rest. She woke up feeling like she hadn't slept at all. It was an endless cycle, waking up tired, living tired, going to bed tired. Everything in her seemed trapped in a rhythm that offered no pause. And it was exactly in this extreme exhaustion, in this deep emotional silence, in this disillusionment with her own life, that a new seed began to form. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just an open space inside her soul, as if she had been emptied enough to finally make room for something new. But in that moment, she had no idea. All she could feel was the weight of living through a season so dark that imagining a way out seemed impossible. Then came a day when everything inside her seemed to stop. There was no crisis, no explosive desperation, no overflowing tears. It was worse, there was complete silence. A silence unlike any she had ever felt. A silence that seemed to come from within, as if even her soul had gone quiet. She realized she had reached a place she had never been before, a place so deep and so dark that not even her pain could scream anymore. She spent hours walking around the house without direction, touching objects without really seeing them, opening doors without knowing why. It was as if she were searching for something, though she didn't know what. Something inside her was looking for meaning but couldn't find any. Everything felt distant, displaced, disconnected. Time passed, but she didn't feel it. The hours dragged on, but they had no weight. It was like being trapped inside a bubble where the world kept moving, but she had stopped. At work, she noticed she no longer reacted to anything. Not even to the injustices that once hurt her deeply. There was no spark. No frustration. No strength left to care. She simply watched things happen, as if she were a spectator of her own life. And that detachment was frightening, because it showed her she was fading little by little, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Conversations with people began to lose their color too. She answered automatically, smiled out of reflex, agreed out of habit. No one noticed that this wasn't her real smile. It was just something she repeated because she had learned she was supposed to. But inside her, there was nothing. No spark. No glow. Nothing at all. At home, she started having small emotional memory lapses. She forgot what used to make her happy. Forgot details she once treasured. Forgot even her own accomplishments, because she no longer had the energy to feel them. It was as if her life were slowly being erased frame by frame, and she didn't have the strength to hold on to the memories before they disappeared. One night, sitting on the living room floor with the lights off, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she felt genuinely excited about something. She couldn't recall the last time she laughed for real, or the last time she truly believed in herself. That realization hit her like a heavy stone. It was a strange feeling, not sadness, not fear, not anger. Just absolute emptiness, as if she had become a shadow of who she used to be. Loneliness also shifted into something else. It wasn't just feeling alone, it was feeling absent from herself. It was as if she had been lifted out of her own story and placed into another one that didn't make sense. She walked through the rooms of her home carrying that emptiness like a part of her body. There was no escape. No distraction. Just her, the silence, and the weight of existing without wanting to, yet without having the strength not to. During this period, she would catch herself staring at nothing for long minutes, as if waiting for something to happen. But nothing happened. There was no sign, no inner voice, no fear, no hope. Just stillness. Just darkness. Just her. That emotional bottom was so deep that it revealed something she had never admitted before. She was completely broken. Not a little. Not halfway. Completely. In a way she didn't know how to fix. In a way she never imagined she could reach. And accepting that hurt more than any heartbreak she had ever endured. But as painful as it was, that bottom had a purpose she couldn't yet see. It was the end of a cycle. A necessary ending, silent, heavy, and heartbreaking, that always comes right before rebirth. It was in that exact moment, when she believed there was nothing left inside her, that her story would slowly begin to shift. The next day, nothing particularly different happened, yet she noticed something she had never noticed before. The same tired routine, the same weight in her chest, the same slow steps through the house. But there was one small difference: she didn't break down when she woke up. She didn't cry. She didn't feel that silent explosion inside her chest that had become her morning ritual. It was the smallest change, almost invisible, but it made her heart beat in a slightly different way. She got up slowly, carrying the same heaviness, but with a tiny thread of awareness that felt a little more awake. As if a sleeping part of her had lifted its head just a fraction of an inch. Nothing extraordinary, nothing dramatic, just a fraction. And sometimes that's all it takes. Her mind, even exhausted, noticed something subtle: she wasn't worse. And for someone who had been sinking a little more every day, not getting worse felt almost like spotting a crack of light. As she walked through the house, she noticed small things she had been ignoring. The morning light slipping through the window. The distant sound of a car passing by. The mug she loved, resting in its usual place. Simple things, almost insignificant, yet things she hadn't really seen in weeks. It was as if the world were slowly coming back into focus, emerging from the emotional blur she had been trapped in. In the shower, she let the water run over her face and felt that, for a moment, she wasn't as suffocated. She wasn't light, but she wasn't as heavy. It was like carrying 2 stones instead of 3. It still hurt, still drained her, still pressed on her chest, but there was just a little more space to breathe. That small relief, even if temporary, made her realize that maybe it was possible to survive the storm inside her. Throughout the day, she had brief seconds of clarity where she observed her thoughts without being swallowed by them. She couldn't control them, they were still dark, still dense, but she could look at them from a slight distance, the way someone watches a storm through a window without stepping directly into the rain. That tiny bit of distance wasn't healing, but it was a breath. When she opened her closet to get dressed, she chose a shirt she hadn't worn in months. Not because she was excited to wear something different, but because for some reason it caught her attention. A simple detail, but symbolic. It was the first choice she made in weeks that wasn't automatic. A small decision, almost meaningless, but it showed that the part of her that chooses, and not only obeys, was slowly coming back. At work, even though her energy was still low, she managed to complete a few tasks without the emotional weight that had suffocated her in the days before. She felt tired, yes, but not paralyzed. And that difference had a quiet impact on her. It was as if her mind were testing the ground before trying to walk again. She didn't trust her strength yet, but she was searching for hints that maybe it could return. On her way home, she noticed she was a little more aware of the path she always took. She saw a tree she had never noticed before, even though she passed it every day. She felt the light breeze touching her face. She noticed the sky darkening slowly, painted in a soft color she hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't joy, she still couldn't feel that, but it was awareness. And awareness is the first sign that a soul is beginning to wake up again. That night, sitting on the couch, she felt something new inside her, a lightness so small it seemed almost imaginary, yet it was there. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't hope. It was just a pause in the despair. A quiet gap between 2 heavy thoughts. A single second when the pain wasn't in complete control. And that single second was enough to touch something deep within her. She couldn't explain it, but she felt that this small space, this tiny opening, might mean something more. Not yet. Not in that moment. But maybe soon. It was as if life itself were saying that the absolute darkness had finally begun to loosen, not because she gave up, but because it had reached its limit. And when darkness reaches its limit, light always finds a way in. The next morning, she woke up with the same exhaustion as always, but there was a different kind of restlessness inside her, as if something within were quietly calling her to move. It was a small force, subtle and almost delicate, yet persistent. She couldn't explain why, but she decided to leave the house a few minutes earlier. Maybe to breathe, maybe to escape the heaviness inside her for a moment. She just felt she needed to walk, and she had always learned to respect these silent impulses. The air outside was cold, but comforting. She walked slowly, noticing details she had overlooked for weeks. There was still no excitement, no spark, but there was presence. That simple act, being present in that moment, was already something new after so many weeks lost inside herself. Then, as she passed a small used book stand tucked almost invisibly along the sidewalk, something caught her attention. Among dozens of stacked titles, one single book seemed to stand out. Not because of its cover or its colors, but because of the strange pull that made her gaze stop right there. It felt as if that book had been placed in that exact spot just for her. The title carried a simple message, yet it pierced through her chest as if it had been written for her tired soul. Life speaks when you learn how to observe. She froze. A soft, almost imperceptible shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't a coincidence, she felt that with absolute clarity. There was something in that sentence that spoke directly to the woman who, days earlier, had sat in a silent room and asked, "Why me?" And now, right there on the street, life seemed to be answering through an old book, "Observe." Without fully understanding why, she picked the book up. The smell of old pages brought a strange sense of comfort. It felt like holding a forgotten piece of herself she didn't know she had lost. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unmistakable feeling that this wasn't random. It was a calling. A response. The beginning of something she couldn't name yet, but that stirred something deep in her soul. She bought the book almost without thinking, slipped it into her bag, and kept walking. With each step, the sensation grew stronger. Her heart seemed to beat differently, as if aligning itself with something bigger. It felt like an inner recognition, as if a dormant part of her had finally opened its eyes. It wasn't full hope, but it was a spark. The first real spark she had felt in a very long time. At work, even with the usual struggles, her mind kept drifting back to the book resting inside her bag. It was as if it were calling her. As if every page held a quiet invitation. And when she got home that night, without thinking twice, she sat on the couch and opened the book for the first time. Within the first few lines, she felt something inside her tremble. It was a chapter about the cycles of life. About the chaos that comes before awakening. About the moments when the soul needs to break in order to rebuild. It felt as if the author had lived her story. As if they were describing exactly what she had been going through these past weeks. And it touched her in such a profound way that her eyes filled with tears, not of despair, but of recognition. For the first time in a long while, something finally made sense. The pain seemed to have a reason. The chaos seemed to have shape. The darkness no longer felt like an ending, but like a beginning. That simple, intimate reading lit up just one small inch of her path, and that was enough for her to remember something she had forgotten. There was still life inside her. Something was still waiting for her. The universe was no longer silent. It was answering. And she, for the first time in a very long time, was listening. That night, after hours of reading without noticing time pass, she reached a chapter that felt as if it had been written specifically for her. The words seemed to lift off the page and touch parts of her heart she thought were gone forever. The chapter was called, "The Power That Lives Within You," and as she read, she felt something strange, like she was discovering something that had always been there but never had a name. The author spoke about the energy every person carries, about the invisible force that shapes paths, about thoughts that create movement, and emotions that influence every detail of life. He wrote that nothing in the universe happens by accident, and that when the soul reaches its darkest limit, it's because it's about to be pushed toward the light. It was an explanation that made sense in a way that almost hurt, because it described exactly what she had been living. As she continued reading, she noticed the book was talking about something she had heard once before but never took seriously, the law of attraction. Not as an empty promise, not as instant magic, but as responsibility. A force that responds to what she emits. An energy that amplifies whatever she feeds. And for the first time, she understood this not with her mind, but with her heart. The book said that everything in the universe begins within. Feelings, fears, desires, thoughts. And that when life seems to collapse completely, it's because the universe is trying to reorganize it into something greater, as long as she is willing to observe and learn. She closed the book for a moment, holding it against her chest, and took a deep breath. She felt a mix of lightness and intensity, as if something inside her were slowly realigning, shifting back into place. It was a new feeling, yet strangely familiar, an inner recognition that this wasn't coincidence, it was an answer. It took her a few minutes to realize she was crying. Not from sadness, like in the past weeks, but from relief. It felt as if someone had finally explained her pain. As if all the unanswered questions she had been carrying were suddenly part of a process, not a punishment. That gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time, direction. When she went back to reading, she found a passage that would change everything. The universe doesn't complicate things. You complicate them when you forget who you are. Those words kept echoing inside her. Forget who you are. Forget who you are. And in that moment, she understood that the deep pain she had lived through wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a process of finding herself again. She read the chapter 3 times that night. The energy of the words seemed to reach new parts of her awareness each time she went through them again. And as she absorbed every sentence, she felt something inside her ignite, a real spark, steady and bright enough to light more than just a single inch. The light was still small, but it was firm. Before going to sleep, she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She picked up an old notebook, opened to the first blank page, and wrote a sentence that rose from inside her without effort. I want to live. She wrote it slowly, as if being reborn with every letter. And then, for the first time since everything began, she smiled, a shy smile, small, but real. Her story wasn't ending. It was beginning again. The next morning, she woke up different. Not lighter, not completely renewed, there was still weight, still pain, still exhaustion, but there was something new inside her, intention. For the first time in a long while, she didn't get out of bed dragged by obligations, but guided by a tiny, living sense of purpose. The book was still beside her, like a silent companion that had lit her path through the night. And when she looked at it, she felt that same soft vibration she had felt the day before, like a gentle calling. Without knowing exactly why, she felt the urge to pick up the notebook where she had written, I want to live. The cover was a little worn, the pages slightly yellowed from time, but there was something sacred about it. It wasn't just an old notebook, it was a symbol of the new phase she was entering. As she ran her hand over the cover, it felt like she was touching a part of herself that was coming back to life. She sat at the table, took a sip of water, and breathed deeply. For a few seconds, she simply looked at the blank page in front of her. It was strange how something so simple could hold such impact. The empty page represented everything she hadn't lived yet, and everything she could choose to live from that moment on. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from emotion. And then she did something that would change her entire path. She decided to turn that notebook into her journal manifestation. She began writing simple, gentle sentences that came from within, as if they had been waiting for years for that moment. She wrote about what she wanted to feel, what she deserved to experience, the person she wanted to become. Honest words, deeply connected to the new awareness rising inside her. I deserve peace. I deserve happiness. I deserve to find myself again. With each sentence she wrote, she felt a weight lift from her chest. It was as if she were organizing her soul, pulling the pain out from within and placing it into words while everything inside her shifted. The notebook became a mirror of the new energy she was beginning to cultivate. It wasn't just a tool, it was an intimate ritual, a safe place where she could be honest, without fear of judgment. After writing for a few minutes, she closed her eyes and read everything she had put on the page. She felt something inside her come into alignment. The writing wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't polished, but it was real. It was alive. It was hers. And as she reread it, she realized she hadn't written from pain, but from a new strength emerging slowly, gently, courageously. Throughout the day, she noticed small differences. Her body was still tired, but no longer collapsing. Her mind still wavered, but wasn't fully controlled by the weight of the darkness anymore. There were brief moments, tiny but meaningful, when she felt a calm she hadn't felt in weeks. Moments that appeared whenever she remembered the words she had written, when she touched the book, when she took a deep breath. Without realizing it, she began observing herself in a new way. She noticed she was more attentive to her own emotions. She paid attention to the thoughts that rose. She noticed when the heaviness tried to return, and for the first time, she had something to hold on to, the notebook. It had become a piece of hope in physical form, something she could reach for when her inner world threatened to collapse again. And in that simple, intimate, almost silent process, she began to understand what the book truly meant when it spoke about inner power. It wasn't about ignoring the pain or pretending to be strong. It was about consciously choosing the direction of her energy. It was about deciding, every single day, to feed the light instead of the darkness. Her journal manifestation wasn't just the beginning of change, it was the first concrete step into the new life she was creating, page by page, word by word, choice by choice. And without realizing it, she was about to feel the very first reflections of that transformation. In the days that followed, she continued writing in her journal manifestation every morning and every night. Not out of obligation, but out of need. It was as if the practice lit something inside her, as if each sentence she wrote was a thread reconnecting her soul back to her own existence. And as she kept writing, she began to notice changes so subtle that, if she hadn't been more present within herself, she might have missed them. The first sign came in a quiet, almost timid way. She was on her way to work, walking down the same street as always, when she sensed something different in the air. It was a softer breeze, almost comforting, brushing her face in a way that made her stop for a moment. It wasn't just wind, it was a feeling. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt something like tranquility. A calm so quick, so small, yet so real it made her heart beat a little gentler. She smiled without noticing. An involuntary smile. A smile that whispered, something is shifting. The second sign came while she was organizing her desk at work. Amid the chaos of papers, she found a note she had written to herself months earlier and completely forgotten. On the paper, a single sentence, "Life always rearranges itself in your favor." She didn't remember when she wrote it or why. But in that moment, it felt like a direct answer to the thoughts she had been having in the past few days. An unexpected reminder. A whisper. A quiet confirmation. Her chest warmed. It was impossible not to notice the symbolism. The third sign appeared when she was on her way back home. As she walked, her phone buzzed, a message from a friend she hadn't spoken to in a long time. The friend said she had suddenly felt a wave of saudade, that she had thought of her that morning, and was sending love and strength. It was curious, she hadn't told anyone what she was going through, yet someone felt it. Someone remembered. Someone connected. And that message, simple and spontaneous, felt like an invisible hand touching her heart exactly where it hurt. That night, as she sat down to write another page in her notebook, she began to notice a pattern. The signs weren't random. They weren't scattered coincidences. They were answers. Answers to the small inner shifts she had been cultivating. It was as if the universe were saying, "Keep going, I'm right here." And this realization made her breathe deeply, with a calm she hadn't felt in a long time. She wrote in her notebook with more intention than she had in the previous days. "I allow life to show me the way." And as she wrote the sentence, she felt a gentle wave of emotion move through her body. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't exaggerated hope. It was an inner recognition that something inside her truly was realigning. For the first time in a very long while, she believed in that sentence. Really believed it. Because she was already seeing the answers unfold. When she lay down to sleep, she noticed another sign, perhaps the most delicate one of all. She didn't cry before falling asleep. It had been weeks, maybe months, since that had happened. The night was no longer a silent emotional battle. It was peaceful, almost serene. She drifted off with a soft feeling of gratitude she couldn't even explain. Not for great achievements, but for the simple fact that she had survived up to that point, and that she was slowly being reborn. And then, at dawn, came the sign she never expected, a profound sense of presence. She opened her eyes and, before even sitting up, she felt she was no longer living in the dark. There were still challenges, still aches, but they were no longer bigger than her. Something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, she felt that life was on her side, not against her. This was only the beginning. The signs were only starting to appear. And the universe had much more reserved for her. The days that followed those first signs were unlike anything she had experienced in the previous months. Not because everything was perfect, there were still difficulties, still insecurities, still painful memories that surfaced from time to time, but because now she was present enough to notice the small openings the universe was creating around her. Every detail seemed to gain new meaning, as if life were rearranging itself in a gentle, almost poetic way. She kept writing in her journal manifestation with a dedication that surprised even her. It wasn't a spiritual obligation or a mechanical routine. It was a meeting. A sacred ritual she had with herself every single day. And the more she wrote, the more she could feel the inner transformation taking shape. It wasn't an instant miracle, it was building. It was healing in layers. It was rebirth happening in silence. On one of those days, when she opened her notebook and reread some of the sentences she had written, she felt something profound. She wasn't just throwing wishes onto paper. She was creating a new version of herself. She was giving shape to her own emotions. She was choosing to see beauty where before there had only been emptiness. And in that moment, with her hand resting over the written page, she whispered softly, almost without realizing it, the sentence that would become the mantra of her new life. Gratitude is the daily miracle that keeps the universe in motion, and today I choose to believe. When she said those words out loud, something inside her aligned. It was as if that sentence hadn't been created in that moment, but found. As if it had been waiting for her for a long time. A simple but powerful truth. A reminder that even in the darkest seasons, there is always something to be grateful for, and that gratitude is what pushes the universe forward. That same day, a small moment reinforced this awareness. She was at work when she unexpectedly received a sincere compliment from a colleague she rarely spoke to. It wasn't about anything grand, it was about a detail she had done out of habit, without realizing its value. The compliment came with a warm smile, and it touched her more deeply than she expected. It was a clear sign that her energy was changing, and the world around her was beginning to respond. Later, as she left, a stranger held the door open for her with kindness. A simple gesture, ordinary, everyday, but on that day, in that moment, it struck her deeply. Because when someone has lived with internal pain for too long, small acts of kindness become great reminders that the world can still be gentle. On her way home, she noticed her own body lighter, more open, more present. Her breathing flowed better. Her chest wasn't as tight. Her gaze was more aware of what was happening around her. It was as if the universe were whispering, in every detail. "Keep going. You're coming back." When she arrived home, she sat on the edge of her bed and took a deep breath. For the first time since the beginning of her entire journey, she felt a quiet pride. Not for great achievements, but for surviving. For staying. For choosing, even without strength, to take one more step. Before going to sleep, she opened her journal manifestation again and wrote the sentence she had spoken earlier, this time with her whole heart. Gratitude is the daily miracle that keeps the universe in motion. Today, once again, I choose to believe. When she closed the notebook, she felt that the phrase wasn't just something beautiful, it was the truth that would sustain her new story. And she was about to discover just how much that choice would change everything. As the weeks passed, something extraordinary began to happen. Her life, once so heavy and silent, began to bloom in ways she never imagined. Not all at once. Not in a sudden miracle. Not as the solution to every problem. But it was real. It was gradual. And it was powerful. First came the small opportunities. An unexpected invitation to join a project at work. Then, a message from an old friend offering support and partnership. Later, a genuine compliment from someone she admired, someone who saw in her qualities she herself had forgotten. It was as if the universe were returning, with care and precision, everything she had begun to cultivate inside herself. And then came the bigger breakthroughs. A course she had always wanted to take suddenly appeared with an unbelievable discount. Someone influential shared one of her writings without her even knowing. An idea that had been asleep for years finally took shape and turned into a new path, one full of possibilities. Step by step, sign by sign, the world seemed to open doors that had always been there, but that she couldn't see because she didn't have the energy to recognize them. With each small step forward, she felt the same mantra vibrating inside her, like an inner compass leading the way. Gratitude is the daily miracle that keeps the universe in motion, and today I choose to believe. Repeating that sentence aligned her soul with the purpose that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to bloom. When she looked back, she barely recognized the version of herself who once sat on the living room floor, drained, surrounded by silence and pain. Not out of shame, but out of understanding. She knew now that the pain had been the soil that allowed something new to grow. She finally understood that rock bottom was not a punishment, it was propulsion. The breaking point had become the beginning of rebirth. And without even trying, she began to inspire others. At first through small conversations. Then through long, heartfelt messages to people who were facing similar darkness. With time, invitations came for her to speak about her journey. People asked her to share her story, to open paths, to illuminate internal processes for those who were still at the beginning of their own shadows. Her life had expanded from the inside out. It had risen. It had turned into something much greater than anything she imagined on her hardest days. She had become living proof that the universe responds when the soul awakens. And whenever she told her story, she always ended with the sentence that changed everything. Gratitude is the daily miracle that keeps the universe in motion. And if you're hearing this right now, choose to believe too. She knew the transformation wasn't a final destination, but a continuous path, a daily movement between light, shadow, falling, and rising. But now she had tools. She had awareness. She had faith. She had her journal manifestation, where every written page was a reminder that she had saved herself. And most of all, she carried the deep understanding that life didn't need to be perfect to be sacred. And when she looked at those who listened to her, or read her story, or found their own way through hers, she felt a soft calling to share the most important truth. The same power that saved her life exists in the life of the one listening now. The universe makes no distinctions. Love makes no exceptions. Light always finds a way in, even in the darkest places. And then, in her final message, the one that closes the story but opens a doorway for everyone watching, she spoke with her whole soul. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "I choose to believe." Share this video with someone who needs this light. And subscribe to the channel, because every day I bring messages that remind you of the power that lives inside you. She smiled. A big, real, vibrant smile, full of life. Because now she knew. Her transformation was only the beginning. The rest was expansion.